a human rights activist and a defender at the same time. And you know what happened last year in the run-up to the SADC summit, the 44th ordinary SADC summit, and the human rights violations that ensued in the preparation for Zimbabwe to hosting this summit. And she became one of those people who went, should I say, through the fire, but we have to hear from her, telling us her story. I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting and wanting to hear from the horse's mouth. Namatei, welcome to the Big Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to finally have a chance to talk.
So today I just want us to talk and reflect on what happened last year in the run-up to the SADC summit. Firstly, maybe you can just give us a broader perspective in terms of the human rights violations that were happening in the country, and then we'll narrow down to your experience.
Okay, no, thank you so much for that question, Costa. So I think that it's very important for us to start off from the place that you're describing, where we talk about a lot of the things that were happening, not just to me, because I think that the story that happened to us, myself and the colleagues I was abducted with on that plane, is something that is very similar to the stories of so many other people who had similar experiences during that same period. So I want to just situate all of this in June, on the 16th of June. On the 16th of June, I was in Germany at the time, and I remember going on social media to see videos of, what had happened to James Timber and Avondale and the 78. And it was very appalling because it was a private gathering. They were celebrating the Day of the African Child, which is celebrated on the 16th of June. And the police descended on them with so much brutality. You fast-track that, because that was an ongoing issue, to the 27th of June. This was when there was the bail hearing for the Avondale 79. And when the bail hearing happened, there was a public procession of sorts at the courts where people were against the bail ruling in which they had been denied bail. And on the 27th of June, I was in South Africa. So I flew in from South Africa back into Zimbabwe on the 28th. Now, you fast-track that into July. We saw an escalation in, similar incidents and similar issues. And, as you move close to the SADC summit, we saw an increased appetite to harass people. We saw an increase in, just basically roadblocks, people being stopped at different roadblocks. So you could really tell that the security situation was becoming worse. And then we come to the 31st of July. And on the 31st of July, I myself was traveling to Victoria Falls. It was a domestic flight, so I was not flying out of the country. I was flying to Victoria Falls. And I was flying to Victoria Falls for a conference, an African philanthropic conference. Now, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, this African philanthropic conference is a conference that, people like Graça Machel, the wife of the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, she was attending. I do know that some government officials had been invited to that particular event. So it cannot be said that it was a toxic or like a bad event or like,
a platform where people meet to plan something bad about their own country or their own government.
Not even. And I think it was actually a very progressive conference because it was talking about African development and African philanthropy, right? Something that I'm absolutely interested in. So I decided I would attend that. Now, to put things into perspective, a week before, I had had a dental procedure and I had had 4 teeth extractions at the same time. So when I felt a little bit better, I decided, hey, let me travel to Victoria Falls It would be great to go to the conference, great networking platform, learning so much, but also the falls is beautiful. When it's done, you can just, relax. You can go see the falls and, go home. That was pretty much the plan.
And besides, an opportunity for you to also contribute to whatever discourse is being...
Absolutely. And I think for me, it was more about the learning. I think the learning was so important to me because this was a platform where some of the great minds in Africa, some of the great minds of African philanthropy would be participating. So I think my contribution there was to actually, as a young African, to actually go there and to learn about what philanthropy will look like, what development will look like in Africa. So that was the major point of excitement because it feeds into so much into the work that I do, but also into the work that I would like to do in the future. So I think that was the major interest. In terms of contributing to the discourse, because I had tooth extractions, I wasn't planning on talking much. I was actually planning to listen more and learn. So I think that was the major excitement about that. So I think something that I want to put into perspective, when I went to the airport, initially I had been booked for an 8 a.m. flight, okay. Right? And then because I had called in to say, hey, I got teeth extractions and I'm not sure if I would still make the conference. The people I'd called in to talk to had said, it's fine. But then they went on to remove my ticket. So when I went in the morning, I thought that there would be a ticket and there was no ticket. Now, I want you to hold on to that because it would make sense later on when we analyze some of the things that then happened. So when I got there and I saw there was no ticket, we were told that you called in sick. So the ticket was taken out of the system, yes. I left. I called my mom to come pick me up, and then I left the airport. I don't want to be at the airport unnecessarily. It's not a very nice place to be. So I left, and then initially I'd actually thought to say, hey, let me just cancel this because it was turning out to be a bit too hectic for me. But I was like, oh, well, this is one of the coolest, coolest places to be. African philanthropy. Amazing stuff, amazing people, amazing thinkers, amazing minds. So it's the place to be right now. So let me just allow them to give me a new ticket, and then I will come back and then travel to Victoria Falls. So I then got the 12:50 flight, the 10 to 1 flight, and had I known that it would be a flight of horrors. So I came back to the airport, and we, my mom just left me there, and then I proceeded to check in, pass through the security counter. Now, for those of you who don't know what the security counter is at the airport, if you check in, there is this weird counter with these weird people that just don't talk to you. They just look at your passport. So typically those are security people. So for people that are flagged in the system, whether you are wanted, or people that, in my case, political activists or persons of interest, people that have committed crimes, typically that's where people get located by the security system when you want to leave the country. So it's a security counter of sorts. So I passed through the counter, and one of the men who was there on the day practically asked me, why are you angry? I was not angry. I was not sure why he thought I was angry. So I just simply didn't respond and then walked away. But he had a very, very ugly smirk on his face. And I didn't pay them much attention because they typically like that. That's how they carry themselves. So I went through the scanning of our luggage. And after that, went to immigration, then went to the domestic terminal. And we then sat at the boarding gate. So I sat at the boarding gate for a good 30, 45 minutes. And this was the point where I met Samuel Gwenzi and Robson Chere. Both men could identify me particularly from social media because I'd never met Mr. Chere before. I'd only known him from Twitter. Samuel, I'd seen him here and there, but it cannot be said that we knew each other that well. It was quite remote, and also I knew him because he had run for council at some point. Vusi, I never even noticed because I don't know him. So I want you to hold that as well, because I think at some point the story was, those people were working together, they were conniving and whatnot. But these are people that I just met there, and I had no idea that we were going to the same place until we actually met at the gate. So yeah, I mean, we're there a good 45 minutes, and I want you to.
So these are the gentlemen. They were also Victoria Falls bound.
They were going to Victoria Falls
for the same function.
For the same function, and I actually learnt about it at the gate, at the boarding gate. Okay. Yes. So finally, we were taken to the plane, and when we were taken to the plane, we boarded the plane. We got buckled up. We fastened our seatbelts. The doors were closed. The engines even started. But for some reason, the plane didn't take off. The engine was just running. For a good 20 minutes, it was just running. And then after a while, we hear the pilot through the intercom, and he just explains to us that we're still grounded because we've not received security clearance. As soon as we get security clearance, we will then depart. The engine keeps running. And then after a while, the engine was turned off. And when the engine was turned off, the doors were opened, and, 2 people got on the flight. A woman, she had a short bob. I think she was wearing pink pants and a white chiffon top, and she was pregnant. And a man, he was about my height, a bit stout, and I've seen him before a couple of times at the airport. So if you travel through that airport quite a bit, he usually was the guy who does the evening shift, when you're coming back into the country. So when you're coming back into the country, before you go to immigration to get your passport stamped that you've returned, there's a man that just stand there and they check your passports. So he was one of the guys. So I've seen him quite a number of times before. And he's someone that if I was to see him walking down the street, I would definitely recognize him, because that would not be the first time I've seen him. So I want you to pay attention to the detail also about this idea of bringing in a pregnant woman and this other gentleman on the flight. How I think it was also like meant to not make us guarded, like to not alarm us. And then they just start walking.
Put you at ease.
Yeah, so what would a pregnant woman do? I mean, it's the most harmless thing, right? It's not, something to be worried about. So I was sitting a little bit further ahead, and all 3 men who were taken with me were behind. And I think that because I was sitting further ahead, when I was asked to get off the plane, because they got to me and they said, "Namatei, can you please exit the plane?" I was very fidgety. I was very uncomfortable, and I began to immediately ask, "I'm sorry, what is this about? Who are you?" and so forth. And then I quickly got my phone and quickly started trying to call someone from home, and also started texting a lawyer that I knew to say, "Hey, I don't think what's happening here is proper." So they moved back. They got these men.
They left you.
They left me, and then they went back to get the men. And I was still fidgeting. So the woman comes back again and she says, "Hey, we will explain everything once you're outside. You need to go outside the plane." And I said, "Hey, can you at least tell me who you are and what this is about?" "No, you'll be told everything when you get off the plane." And then I said, "Well, are we going to come back? Like, what does this mean? What is happening?" And she kept insisting that you will be told everything once you are outside. So finally, I decided, let me go outside. But I went outside holding my phone. And as soon as I go down the stairs of the plane, there were 2 men who were waiting, on the ground. And of the 2 men, I recognized one of the men. He was tall, dark, bloodshot eyes. He was wearing a navy blue suit and a red tie. Now, I recognize him in particular because the previous year, in 2023, when I traveled to Germany, he was the one at the security counter, and he spoke to me. They typically don't speak to you, but he spoke to me. That's how I remembered him. And he asked me, where are you going? And what are you going to do there? That's what he did the previous year. So I've seen him before at the security counter. So I'm giving reference to those people because there's a very strong possibility and probability that the day that we were being held in Comunicado and you passed through the airport, on that same day or the day after or sometime before, you've probably seen these people because they actually worked at the airport. They've probably checked your passport. You know, they've probably, walked past you or you walked past them, right? You've probably seen those people. And I think this is the biggest bother, I think, for me, because these are people that are well known. And I think if people could do a bit of digging within the airport system, it would be very easy to find out who their names are. So basically, these are the people. So when I got down the stairs, all three men were already outside the plane. I was taking my time because I was trying to communicate that, hey, something fishy is happening here. So I was the last person to get out. Already I could tell that they were very annoyed that I was not being compliant and they thought I was causing trouble.
Do things at your own time.
Oh, at your own time, and stuff like that. So when I get down, of the two men that were standing to my right, they basically tried to grab my phone. One of them, the tall guy, tries to grab my phone. And that's when I knew that this is not going the way it's supposed to. What was also a point of shock for me was that, he already had other phones, so I figured he'd taken my colleague's
taken
phone.
From your colleagues, yeah.
So when he tried to grab my phone, I hit him with my elbow and I refused, and I kept holding my phone. I said, I want to call my mom. I wanted to come pick me up, right? And they looked at me and they looked very upset, but they didn't do anything after that. So this woman goes back up, grabs my handbag that I'd left, and then they instruct the flight attendants to get our luggage from the back. So our luggage was literally off-boarded. You know, they took it out. They took out our luggage that we checked in. And then they told us to walk, right, towards the buildings. And as we walked towards the buildings, I was ferociously using my phone. And I would at some point ask them what this was about. And when I figured that I couldn't make a call because it was too windy, and also the plane was too close by, so people couldn't really hear me when I was calling, I just resorted to just texting as many people as I could. Hey, we're being arrested. Hey, we're being arrested. And they kept telling us to walk. So as we got to the building at the airport, I figured there was nothing there. There was no door. There was nothing there. And again, I was the last person to get there because I was being very difficult and perhaps to try and buy time because I was still texting people.
Using your phone?
Using my phone. So when we get to the building, they then showed us this little square hole in the building. And then they told everybody to get into the square hole. And I think for me, that was when it hit me that this is not proper. And I told them, I don't want to get in through there. I want to get in through a door. What you're doing is illegal. And of the two men who'd been standing at the ground when I got off the plane, they seemed very pissed off. And they said, you've been a problem. You've been a problem since we got you on the flight. You're being a problem now. And, using very explicit Shona, they told me that they could just beat me up. Very, very explicit language. They told me that they were not here to play, and they were just tired of my antiques. Basically, that's what they were saying. So this is when they finally did grab my phone because I was still holding it, but I'd managed to text quite a number of people and told them that, hey, we've been arrested. And when they grabbed my phone, they grabbed because I was the last person to literally be thrown in and kicked in through that square hole. They literally manhandled me, picked me up from the ground, chucked me in through the little square hole, and they just started kicking.
These were all men who did this?
These were all men. They just started kicking, and they were kicking wherever and however. And I remember, like, one of them kicked me so bad on my back that I remembered, like, I peed on myself a little bit. They were just kicking to fit me through the square hole because I was refusing. I tried to hold on to one of the, because I was refusing to get in, and he was kicking my hand. They were just kicking anyhow. So finally, they managed to push me in with their feet, and then they throw in my luggage. And then I realized it was a carousel because when I got inside, it was a carousel. So I figured it was like one of those holes that they use to put our bags in inside the airport so that we can go collect them at the carousel, because there was a carousel immediately inside.
Did your colleagues immediately comply with the instruction?
They complied. They got in. So I was the last person to get in. And I remember, like, when these men were kicking me, I was screaming so loud that all three of them ran and they wanted to see what was happening, right? And I was just saying that I was telling them that they were kicking me, and then they just started saying, we didn't do anything. We didn't do anything, right? Once I was inside. But when we were outside, they were actually kicking me to force me in through the square hole. So once we're inside, I see that, no, it's a carousel. So I knew it's an arrivals terminal, right? It's an arrivals terminal of sorts. But I wasn't sure which part of the airport we were at, right? I wasn't sure. I knew it's an arrivals terminal. I've used the airport, especially the international side. So I knew if it was the arrivals of the international, I would know this is the arrivals for international. But I didn't know which part of the airport. So I knew it's like maybe a closed off section, but it's an arrivals terminal because of the carousel. So once we're inside, the place was filthy. So you could tell that, like, it's undergoing renovations. It was very, like, dusty and dirty. So you could tell, like, the renovations happening. And for the first time, we actually then start asking each other, hey, what's happening? Why are we here? What's going on? What is it that they want? Because it was not clear to us what it is that they want. They had not introduced themselves. And for the first time, I was now awake to the reality that this was not an arrest. Because if these were police, they would have told us, hey, I'm Inspector so-and-so of whatever section, and we are, getting you because of 1, 2, 3 issues that we would like to address. If you're being arrested in terms of this, this, and this. It is believed you have committed whatever crime. None of that was ever done. And I think it's so important to have that in our minds, because there were people that kept saying that we were arrested. We were not arrested, we were abducted. And we were held incommunicado for over 8 hours, right? We never saw anyone from the police. We were never told what crime we had committed, except for a lot of accusation to say that you wanted to go to Victoria Falls to plan demonstrations.
But what do you make of our police force in relation to the experience that you went through? Because we know that under normal circumstances, the person must be informed of his or her charges or the crime that the person committed. But I just want you to maybe share with viewers and everybody who is following this interview, what is your opinion, or what do you make of that kind of policing, that kind of arresting? Where does it put us, maybe perhaps as a country, and also what does it do to young people?
All right, cool. So I think that it's important for us to understand that we were not arrested. We were abducted. That's to start with. Second of all, it's important for us to highlight that these people are not the police. They were not the police. I wanted just to put it out there. We were handed over to the police by these people. And I think where I've done my research, talked to a number of journalists who managed to establish where the order might have come from, they have told me that on the day that we were abducted at the airport, there was a memo that was circulated at the airport, which basically said that counterintelligence operatives at the airport had off-boarded us. So these are probably people from the intelligence. And when they off-boarded us, they say that it was the CIO, Ferret branch one, I think, that they said were the ones that, in quotes, interviewed us. But it was not an interview, right? It was an interrogation. A brutal interrogation, where at some point I actually thought Robson Cherry had died because of just how badly they had beat him up, you know. And it's something that even to this day I struggle to reconcile with, because I think, without, expressing too much detail about how the torturing was happening, etc., because I think those are things that you also have to process, with properly trained clinical psychologists. So for me, I'm still trying to come to terms as to why would people be that hateful. I remember at some point, because they would just take one of us at a time and they would put us in this dingy room. So you were in the carousels and there was this little dingy room. And that room was very poorly lit. It would be in bright, 2 p.m., 3 p.m. afternoon sun outside. But in that room, it would look like how it looks like maybe at 4 or 5 in the morning, because it was so dimly lit. Yeah.
Tell me something.
Yeah.
What were these people saying during that whole process of, you said, interrogation? What were they saying? Were they asking you questions? And what were they asking actually?
All right, cool. They were asking a number of things. They were asking, a lot of the stuff was profiling questions. It was like, who are you, etc. And I think after the profiling questions, they began to move into a lot of accusations. And the accusations were, you were planning to embarrass the president. The accusations where you were going to Victoria Falls to join others to plan a demonstrations ahead of SADC.
From your knowledge, was the president scheduled to speak or to come?
No, he was not. From my little knowledge that I have, he was not scheduled. So it was like, we know you want to embarrass the country, you want to embarrass the president. And I think just about how petty those people sounded, because they would say things like, when visitors are coming to your house, you must be well behaved so that you don't embarrass the president. That's just how petty some of those people would actually sound. So it's also important for us to know that the people that took us from the plane are not the people that did the torturing and the interrogation. Those people seemed like they came from somewhere, because at some point we were in that room in that arrivals terminal, which when the police took us at night, I figured it was the domestic terminal, because now we went out through the front and I could see that we were actually at the domestic terminal. And in hindsight, Costa, I think the one thing that really breaks my heart about this whole ordeal was about a month or so later, in October, going November, I had to go to the police station to report that my passport, because they had taken my passport, they wanted to verify our identity, so they took my passport and they never gave it back. I've never seen that passport ever since. So for me to be able to apply for a new passport, I had to have a police report. So I had to go and do a police report. And I had gone to quite a number of police stations, Borodale Police, Avondale Police, and they told me to go where the issue happened. I'm not quite sure is that how it works. So I was forced to then go to the airport, because I was trying to avoid going to the airport, and I went there with my lawyer. And when I then went to the police station at the airport, I realized that the place where we were kept, the distance from, the police station at the airport and the place where they kept us for those 8 hours, it's literally like a 50-meter difference. It's right next to, right next door. So it absolutely was preposterous. It didn't make any sense why it had to be this way. But I think one of the things that I was trying to establish throughout this whole ordeal was, what is it that they want, right? Because they were not clear what it is that they want. And I was to later on figure out that they wanted information. And this is where, because, we can go on and on about narrating the details about the abduction, they did this, they, whatnot. But I don't think that's the focus, because people can always access that through public records and what's already at the courts and so forth. You can always read about it and access it. But I think what's more important is a detailed analysis of what was happening and their behavior. And their behavior seemed like, we are moving towards SADC and we don't have enough information, so we want to extract information. They were fixed on my laptop, they were fixed on our phones. They kept demanding that, those be opened. All of my gadgets were Apple products. And when I was refusing to open them, by the time that they wanted me to open them, I could already tell that they blocked, because they were trying all kinds of different passwords. And I figured that the initial stage of the interrogation, where they were asking us our names, date, and whatnot, they had an IT guy. I figured he was the IT guy because he kept our stuff. So they were trying to establish, if from that they could, predict my password or my colleagues' passwords, of which I have very random, very strange, weird passwords. So I don't think it would have been possible for them to predict. So when they figured that they were not able to kind of guess the passwords, we knew that they would bit the lights out of you until you opened that phone. And that's what basically they were telling us. That we knew that it was we will do whatever it takes. So I knew then that it was, we want information. That's what I knew. So I think in hindsight, my thinking is our intelligence system literally is probably not very sophisticated in their approach. Because if you're having to use that much force to try and establish what is happening in your own country, by that point, ahead of the SADC summit, they should have known. They should have had a sense that, this might happen or this might not happen. Because that's how intelligence works. You gather information with as minimum force as is possible.
So in other words, they could have been misled.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the thing about it was, you could tell that they wanted to use as much force as is possible to extract whatever information that they wanted to extract.
But I also want you to tell us this. You had just done your dental procedure, and then you go through this ill treatment. I can imagine how that possibly affected you. Maybe you would like to add more details or clarifications if you're comfortable with them.
So I think that it's taken me a while, I think, to actually maybe detail just the levels of poor treatment that we had to undergo. And I think to do so without crying, without breaking down. I think at some point even I was not able to even...
Did you even at some point maybe talk to them and say, no, you guys, come on, I'm actually at this medical condition recently?
Yes, so
or you actually even exposing yourself more to them?
So I think for me, that was a conversation. That was a conversation that happened because they kept saying that I was speaking too low. And I had indicated to them that I had a dental procedure.
They wanted you to shout, speak loud.
They said they couldn't hear me because they said I was literally speaking very low,
Which is normal when someone is.
Yeah, I guess, but also it was a bit of a strain because I literally had stitches in my mouth at the time. So I think for me, it's rather regrettable that, you disclose such information, because I think for them it's where you are actually hurt, that's where they get they focus their attention. Because sooner, I was now being told that if you are not complying, because already I think the man who came to the airport to do all the torture had been briefed that I was being difficult and troublesome and I was refusing to comply and whatnot. And I think the one thing that these men, they don't appreciate is resistant energy. So if you're very resistant, they would probably be very awful. But sometimes you don't even need to resist, because it just depends with what they're up to on the day. They could just be out for blood, and they just say we'll beat you up anyway, anyhow. So I think that was that was the experience on that front. And I think for me, I was saying that, we can always reflect on like what happened to Mr. Cherry. Like, I think if he was here to speak, he would. Yeah, I thought he had died at some point.
Okay.
Because at some point I really thought that he was dead. If you talk to Sam, and he talks about how they treated him, how they would threaten to say, we know where you stay, we will rape your wife. We will go there and rape your wife. We know where your kids go to school.
They were telling Chen.
They were telling, I think, Mr. Gwenzi.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Cher as well, because when I talked to him, he also expressed that, this was also the conversation that was happening when he was with them, because every time the interrogation would happen, they would separate us.
So by that time, you haven't been informed of your crime?
We haven't been informed of our crime, except to say we were being accused of planning a demonstration, but there was no reference to the law or like what crime we'd committed. Mm-hmm. So I cannot tell their stories on their behalf. I cannot talk about them. I think it would be up to them to share. Mm-hmm. I was told that because they had asked me if I had children. I said I don't, and I was told that I would die without ever having kids. Like it was like threats like that. And I think that maybe
what did they mean?
Well, it's hard to explain what they meant, because clearly, like, they would probably have to explain it themselves because they know why they were doing that. But I think it was also a kind of like psychological priming to really get you to be afraid. And I think also the room that they would do the interrogation in, the little dingy room, it had a shaft. It had like this deep shaft. Like it's, when I talked to Robson and Samuel, they told me that like it looked like it was like 2-3 meters deep. And also it seemed like there was metal at the bottom. I never had a chance to take a pic. Mm-hmm. But they made you sit so close to the edge, and you just kept thinking, if I don't hold myself steady, I could just fall in.
Sleeping out.
And at some point, I thought maybe they wanted to, kill us and throw us in the shaft, because they kept talking about how they've killed people and how they kill people and how they could just kill us today. No one would know where we are. And also at some point, especially when it came to Mr. Chere, like, I remember they were beating him up so badly. Like, we could hear, it was a thud after another thud, and he was just, you could just hear it was so bad. And then, I had been requesting for the longest of time to go use the bathroom because already I was a little bit wet. When I was kicked, I'd peed a little bit on myself. So the woman was refusing to escort me, the pregnant woman, because she kept saying that I was a screamer, that I would start making noise, I would draw attention. So they were refusing me a bathroom. And I think that went on for a good 3-4 hours until they finally allowed me to use the bathroom. And when they took me to the bathroom, it was a bathroom, a disused bathroom in that arrivals terminal. But I think she had been reluctant to take me there because it was so filthy. And I think that maybe they're still working on renovations in that area. So she then took me there. And, when we were going there, she kept saying things like, I'm just here to make sure that these men don't abuse you or they don't rape you. And they end up lying about it. Was this varuma, she'd say things like that to me. And also she told me, that's how I knew that maybe, things were about to get very heated. There was a man who came at the airport. He was wearing a face mask. It was like a COVID mask and a hat. I figured he was probably their boss because he seemed to command a lot of authority. Mm-hmm. And this woman was just generous enough to just let me know that, he's not a very nice person. So she just told me, hey, when you go back, because, we don't want to hear things like, they did this or that, or they abused you, or they raped you. Just try to comply with whatever he says. And I figured that she was also kind of like I don't know, she was also kind of like looking at him like, you know, he's the authority figure. So it could have been like a lot of psychological play that was happening at the time. Like it could have been like, oh, you know, she plays the good cop, they play the bad guys, and they're trying to get you to, you know. But the one thing I will say is that he's a very soft-spoken man, but he's also a very evil man. And I think, you know, you had all these tough guys, you know, who were doing all the beatings, and he was calling the shots. But I think that he's a very, very evil, very soft-spoken. He speaks very softly.
Very evil.
But I think he's a very evil man. So he was the one calling the shots. So even the bulk of the beatings that happened to Mr. Chere, the viciousness of the attacks, and even when I went into that room, because at some point they were pouring cold water, you know, they started pouring cold water on me. I figured this man could do anything because he simply seems to not care.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, the prison experience for me, when I went to prison, I was a little bit still numb and a little bit confused about what was happening. You know,
It was not your first time, right?
well, it was my first time being taken to the maximum prison for women, but it wasn't my first time being arrested. I've been arrested twice before. And, you know, going to prison was just a very, very tough experience, but I was still a bit numb. But the one thing that I had learned, of course, from other comrades, but also that I had told myself is I need to be very clear when I go there, what I'm going there for. And also, I need to do whatever it is within my control to make sure that I survive that whole experience in prison. So things like bath every day, eat every day, and I was getting food from my family. They brought me food every day. And I think one of the most touching things that happened is even on days when I told my mom not to come, she just come anyway, you know. So, yeah, I just told myself, you know, do what you can, like bath, eat, you know, stay clean, you know, so that you don't get sick, because the last thing you want is to be sick in prison. And also be alert, because I'm very sure that the state would have deployed certain people within the prison infrastructure to watch you. But I think for me, the biggest blessing about my prison experience were the women that had been arrested with James Timber. They were just wonderful. You know, Councillor Edith, Tambuzema Kokora, I don't know if you saw this lady that they would carry on she was being carried on someone's back. Wonderful lady. Lovely sisters, lovely women. And they're strong and they're resilient, you know. Nicole Chabata, also met in prison. They were the babies in the group. Very, very cheerful, very, very pleasant. And after being in prison for such a long time, you'd think that they would be broken or their spirit would be down, but that was not the case. They were always very strong, always very encouraging. And I think the first 2 weeks, because also I was still being medicated because I was bleeding again in my mouth. And there was like a bad taste that I was getting in my mouth because some of the stuff that had been happening. So I was afraid that it would turn septic. So I know, like, my doctor came to prison and gave me antibiotics, and like after a week, it got better. And I think after that you know, that week, I got better. I began to eat again. I was more alert. I was more engaged in what was happening. But I can tell you that first week when I went to prison, you know, I was literally dependent on this sister who had been there in prison. So the last thing I wanted to say is I think the prison conditions are pretty bad. You know, when I got to prison, before my family bought me blankets, you know, I was given a torn up, you know, I think in Shona would call it, you know, like a torn up blanket, or whatever was left of the blanket. And it was, it had the name Parenyatwa on it. So I thought maybe it was a hospital donation at some point. You know.
Oh, the name Parenyatwa.
Yes, it was. I thought it was a donation from Parenyatwa at some point. It was the filthiest thing I had ever received. And I think also ahead of the SADC summit, they kept arresting people. You know, they kept arresting so many people. And at some point in our very tiny cell, we had like 69 people. and you couldn't like you had to wake up to turn, you know. And I remember at the time, because now I was starting to feel all those kicks on my back, huh? So you'd be sleeping there, and you'd wake up and you'd feel all the, every painful spot, and you'd have to turn yourself and sleep. So at some point it was like that. And mind you, you're locked up at around like 3 in the afternoon, and they open at around 8 in the morning, and you can only estimate time because you don't have a watch, right? And the prison guards are not allowed to tell you time. You know, what do you want time for? You're an inmate.
So tell me about food. Of course, you had the family supporting you, friends, colleagues coming supporting you, but what did you observe others eating?
Okay, so I think it's a very, very interesting diet, I think, and I think we can always debate about, because I know the Zimbabwe Prison and Correctional Services might have a lot to say about this. But yeah, it was... I never participated much during meal times, but what I do know is that they did have sadza, and they did have, I think they had more vegetables. I remember at some point there was nyemba, and at some point there was, nyemba, I think it's black-eyed peas, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure what's the name in English. And I think at some point there was, they had, the skin of a pig, it's pork skin, yeah? They had pork skin. Yes, I saw pork skin was actually a favorite with inmates.
Did you test yourself?
No, never. So, I mean, for me, the instruction with my lawyers had been to not eat at all at the prison, so I never ate at all. But I think that at some point, like, the food wasn't that great, because I knew people that would actually eat that food and how they would complain. And I think on occasion here, very rarely, when it was cooked very well, you would actually see a sense of appreciation from inmates. I think I'll conclude it on this prison experience on this issue. When it comes to even like, the toilets and,
bathrooms.
The bathrooms and whatnot, there is need for us to invest in prison infrastructure. I like how a lot of these politicians, when they're up there, sitting on the throne of glory, they forget. But ask Mike Chimombe. I'm not mocking his situation, but I think it's also good that they have walked the path, because when I used to go to court, I used to see him. And mind you, I've been out since 4 September. He's still there, right? I used to see him reading the newspaper and whatnot.
The newspapers there?
I think he got the news. Maybe he was a bit privileged, I don't know. But, you often see him like reading the newspaper and there. But, one day, the system has you up there. Today it has you up there with the Rolls Royce and nice cars and whatnot. And tomorrow you're in prison. So do you ever, when you're up there, remember the people who are down there? Do you ever remember, inmates, prisoners? Do you ever remember the young people that are high on crack or bronco in Epworth? Because we are Zimbabweans, and this is our country, and we are the people of this country. So it becomes a rude awakening. When you're now thrown at Chikurubi Maximum there, and you suddenly realize that these are the squalid conditions that inmates have to live under, and not just political prisoners, inmates in general. If you have relatives who've been arrested and they are locked up in prison, and you're not visiting them, they are probably suffering a great deal. And I feel sorry for people who are transferred, because someone might get arrested in Chipinge and then maybe they're transferred to Harare. So it makes it harder for your family, in Masvingo or whatever, to come to see you quite often. So it's a very tough experience, and some of these families are very poor, right? So I think it's so important that we have churches. Churches collect a lot of money from people. We expect more from them. They have to go visit prisoners and bring buckets, bring soap, bring slops, bring underwear, bring towels, toothbrush, toothpaste, and food sometimes, The inmates appreciate that. I know of Seventh-day Adventists. When I got there, it was all the inmates were raving about. They talked about them all the time. Oh, they are so awesome. When I was there, they never came. But I was told a lot of good things about them. And a lot of people were saying, when we leave this place, we'll join that church, right? I do know of Nedbank. At some point, they went there, and apparently they threw a fist for the prisoners, and the women really appreciated that, right? you corporates, you're making so much money from us as citizens. That's corporate social responsibility. Visit them. Give them a good day. You know, like their children, their mothers with babies in prison. And it touches my heart all the time. You will meet kids that are growing up in prison. You know, buy them clothes. Go and play with them, right? So we as a nation need to really remember our prisoners, and we need to know that the conditions can be better if we decide and if we work together to make sure that it really becomes a correctional service, right? A place where people can reform, not where, you know, they become hard criminals. So I think that's my take on the prison experience.
Okay, so tell us, maybe in summary, what will be your analysis of the events that happened at the airport? Give us a picture when the police arrived. How were you handed over to the police that then took you to Harare Central?
All right. Thanks for the question, Costa. So, you know, I think that this was a very opportunistic thing that happened. It was very opportunistic in the sense that these people seemed like they had not planned, like they were not looking for us, or they just saw that, there are these people that are passing through the airport today. There might be persons of interest. And I think also the idea that a lot of people who are activists were going to the same place probably could have piqued their interest. And what I will say is that when we consider the fact that I had gone to the airport initially and I had seen actually, and said hello to a number of people that I knew in the morning who were checking into the 8 a.m. flight, I know that if I had made that morning flight, this probably would not have happened. So I think their behavior seemed very opportunistic. It seemed like it was not planned, and then they just took advantage of the fact that we were there at the airport. That's one. The second thing was also the haphazard nature of how these things happened, which also shows me that their behavior was very opportunistic. You know, they seemed to have been asking for permission to move in. Because remember, we went through the check-in, we went through the security desk, we went through immigration, we even sat at the boarding gate for a good 30, 45 minutes. We got on the flight.
The flight is about to leave.
The flight is about to leave. And then they stop the flight. And then they say those people must be off-boarded. And you kind of sense that in that period of time, they probably were making communication, calling people and asking for permission to move in. And I think right when we were about to leave, that is when they had probably received confirmation that you can move in. So that was my sense of that. So it didn't seem like it was premeditated. It seemed very opportunistic. The next thing also, and this also worries me, was they didn't seem like they were clearly having an agenda, except for they were trying to fish out as much information as is possible. And I think this is why I was reflecting with you earlier to say that, are they even a professional intelligence if you're having to resort to that much force to pick up information about what is happening? So I think these are very important things to understand. And the next point of analysis is the dramatic nature in which we were taken off the plane. You need to ask yourself, for people who are saying that we don't want to embarrass the president ahead of SADC, and then you go ahead and you grab people off planes, you torture them at the airport, the same airport that dignitaries from so many places will use when they want to attend the SADC summit. You do all of this and you're saying that we want to keep things quiet and we want to not embarrass the president. And yet what you do generates the exact opposite. And for me, I've always had this critical inquisition as to who had the most to benefit from that whole ordeal, from that whole process. Could it be an issue of a faction? Because up to now, I don't know what was that about. I have no clue what was that about. And a lot of people have made this inquisition to ask us, so what were you planning? Nothing. And I think for a lot of people to conceptualize that there are possibilities that you could just be going about your business, living your best life, and this can happen to you for doing absolutely nothing. It's unfathomable. So I want to make reference to this because the drama that ensued after we were handed over to the police, because the police did come, but they came much later. Could have been a good 6, 7, 8, 8 hours or so after we had been taken. And they introduced themselves and they took a very wishy-washy statement. They didn't even spend 3 minutes on any of us. It was just a very wishy-washy thing. And then they left. And those people kept us until much, much later in the night, at around like 10, 11 p.m. when they returned again. And that's when they took us and they took us to the police. Now, I remembered our lawyers driving behind us. Our lawyers had now established that we were at the airport and they were driving behind us. And as soon as we got to the police station, you could tell that the police were a bit nonchalant. I'm not sure what was the energy with that. They were a bit disinterested. And I remember the first thing that I did.
Interested in engaging lawyers?
I think in just the whole thing, because it was 11 at night.
Okay.
Because it's important for you to understand the police didn't take us. Okay. Here you are being given work at 11 p.m. at night, right? And this is also a dilemma for me because a part of me kind of gets where the police are coming from because you have this one rogue part of government that does all this nonsense, a lot of the abductions, the beatings, all of that nonsense. And then they hand these people over to the police, beaten up. And maybe, just maybe, the police are even instructed to say, hey, look for a judge. Because I think the idea for us was we needed to be formalized in the system. They wanted to formalize us into the system because, this was now an issue that had generated a lot of attention. These people have been held. So we now need to make it look like an arrest, which it was not.
Yeah.
It was an abduction. And finally, when we're at the police, that is when, for the first time, I was told that we were being arrested in connection with something that happened on the 27th of June at the court. And I simply laughed and I told my lawyers, hey, throughout June, I went to Germany and then I went to South Africa. So I was not in the country when James Timber was first arrested on the 16th and when the solidarity thing happened at the court on the 27th. And even if I was not there on the 27th, I aligned myself to the people that were there because I agree, James Timber and all those women, all those men he was arrested with should have never been arrested and should have never been treated how they were treated. I aligned myself to that. But still, I was not there. I was out of the country. And this is exactly what the lawyers told the police, and that was our defense. Now, the unfortunate thing was these people had already taken my passport because it would have been easy to show the stamp in my passport. And by then, because that was my defense, we knew that passport was not coming back. So the next day, we were at the police cells at Harare Central. And then a day after, which was almost 48 hours, that is when we were taken to court. And I think the dramatic thing about...
So you slept twice at Harare Central?
Absolutely. So we did our full 2 nights at Harare Central Police before the 48 mark was reached. And we were then taken to court. And I remember
But maybe before court, how was the condition in the cells?
The conditions in the cells at Harare Central are quite bad. And I think I also worry about safety and security. Early morning on the day that we were taken to court, there was a man who was actually able to come all the way up to the female cells to speak with me. He said his name was Mr. Moroyiwa. He was wearing a black leather jacket.
Mrs.
Misty. There's a Mr. Moroyiwa, and I don't even think that's a real name, but that's what he said. He was wearing a black leather jacket, and he says to me, hey, I just wanted to find out how you are. And I said, well, I'm sorry, who are you and where are you from? And then he says, oh, I'm Mr. Moroyiwa, I'm from police intelligence. I just wanted to check on you and find out, are you okay physically? Is everything okay? Are you fine? And then when I told him that, hey, I don't know you, maybe you might want to come back when the lawyers are here. he kept insisting that he just wanted to check my condition and that this was a process that didn't need our lawyers to be there, right? So I think in hindsight, I also realized that him being there is probably a reflection that within their own system, they were not altogether agreeing on how we'd been treated. Which is also why when people have told me that this could have been factional issues, I kind of agree. Because why the need to additionally verify how we had been treated and how we were doing. Because he actually came to check when he came back. So I think it was just a reflection on people that have told me that, hey, we think it was a factional thing. I think it's probably true. And I think there's need to reflect on that beyond just our experience, but to reflect on that, thinking as well about what does that mean when there are factional issues for human rights defenders? Because if these people are playing their chess game and they sense that for me to tarnish the image of the other, maybe let me abduct a couple of people and blame the other.
I think the factional point here I'm raising could be possibly even resonating with the discourse currently going on right now in the country. So I might tend to also maybe say it's an opportunity to really tell our viewers in terms of your analysis the impact of factionalism towards the issue of the protection of people's rights, those that are enshrined in our constitution, especially under Chapter 4.
Yeah, I think that, the factionalism that is happening around, the 2030 agenda, but also generally, it's something that has existed, creates a very dangerous atmosphere for human rights activists and human rights defenders, because it's very, very probable that in a bid to discredit the other, particularly in the international space, one faction can decide to abduct a number of people, torture a number of people, commit very awful things. And then there will be no accountability, because when you then go to the system and say, who gave the shot, who gave the order for this to happen, it could be very difficult to establish
who exactly did it.
Who exactly did it, right? And I think it's just an issue of, let's make the other look bad. So, the point is it creates a very dangerous situation for human rights defenders, because there is a genuine, strong lack of accountability that would also exist in such an environment. And I think also for the president to then come out and say that these are not people from my faction that gave the order, so I'm not taking responsibility for that, would then be him exposing that the system is not altogether functioning, which they typically wouldn't do. So it would be an issue that would remain unresolved and left alone. But the people that are genuinely affected are human rights defenders, are activists. While these big elephants, fight each other. So I think it's very important for us to reflect on HRD security, human rights defender security, and safety, and also the safety of activists in this particular climate. And I think maybe just to talk a little bit about the judiciary.
Because that was going to be my next question, saying after being taken to court and all these processes, just raising all these points that's continuously being discussed until maybe you spend 3 weeks in court trying to talk about the issues of bail, issues of placing you on remand, and why it is wrong, the issues of alibi arising, and so on. How would you maybe describe it to a friend? Not really like in a bad light, but because this is the experience that you went through, and you're meeting someone, you're having an opportunity to really tell this experience.
So I think it's very interesting that we're having this conversation right now when, Blessed Mhlanga is, going through a similar experience. And I cannot speculate about how his experience would pan out. But I can tell you that, in my view, we do not have an independent judiciary. This is my perspective. And I can tell you this because at some point, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice, Bimba Nyemba, was challenging my experience. I, who was there at the airport, who was treated how I was treated.
Who experienced it. Who lived it.
Who lived it, right? She was challenging my experience. And she was also even biased enough to take...
Should we say she was disputing what you... Or...
She was blatantly calling it a lie, right? She was saying that that what I said I went through is a lie. And my thinking is that if a person who is that high up in the judiciary, right, has such a position about a matter that happened, that is still at the courts, that is still under investigation, she was not even there, right? Why have you suddenly picked a side? Why have you sided with my abductors? Why have you sided with the people that tortured us? And this is a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Justice. What is your interest in the matter? That you have already become judge, jury, prosecutor. You've become everything. You are sitting there in God's tribunal, up there with the gods, and deciding that she's lying and they're telling the truth. So if that is happening at that particular level, you can imagine when you cascade it down to the level of the magistrates, where they were fully informed that I was out of the country. They were even finished with my tickets. And I remember Beatrice Mutetwa, the great Beatrice Mutetwa, saying that in a normal country, they would have never prosecuted. They would never have taken that issue to the courts, because it was so blatantly overt that I was out of the country, and they were informed to that effect.
Is this the alibi issue?
It's the alibi issue. It's the alibi issue. And, after that whole thing around I was out of the country, the drama, the drama that ensued, where you had the prosecutor that was dragging the matter, making a very simple thing take so much time. You also have immigration doing its part and saying that we have no record of entry or exit into the country in the same period. And they were basing this on some account from a company called Afrosoft. And what was dramatic from the submissions that Afrosoft gave, they gave an electronic record of my travels through the airport and also other points of exit or entry from 2017 until 2023 in about February, March. It was accurate. And then from 2023 February, March until 2024 in June, they have no record. Now, if I tell you all the places in the world I've been to in that period, I've been to Greece, I've been to the US, I've been to Germany twice. South Africa, I cannot even count, right? And they're telling me that they have absolutely no record of my entries and exits in that said period. And you're thinking they're sitting like, is this a case of incompetence or weaponized incompetence? In which case it is still incompetence. But it just goes to show you how far these people will go to manufacture, to fabricate, and to also lie. And particularly dragging other institutions as well in the lying to
just
have
complicate them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think what you are sharing, we have read this anyway. In various public spaces, people having complaints about how the judiciary handles itself in terms of dealing with matters, especially those matters which are understood to be political. But I want you maybe to really share with us, where is the resolve coming from? And I mean, is it just naturally you, as a young person, you go through all this, but you are still able to rise up again and still stand where you stood, like what those guys like to refer to, say, I stand where I stood, But I mean, anyway, the point is, you seem to be very persistent and very consistent and very determined. How can another fellow young woman also follow your footsteps in terms of that resolve?
All right, sure. I think the first thing that I wanted to say, Costa, is I do not just represent a constituency called Young Women. I represent a constituency called Zimbabweans. And I stand with Zimbabweans that are marginalized, that are poor, and are having to live squalid, impoverished lives. My life's mission, why I was brought into this world, is to advance human possibility. And what does advancing human possibility mean? What does it mean to me? It simply means that every human being alive deserves to live a life that is filled with possibility and opportunity, where they can reach the heights of their potential. It doesn't matter that it's like a young person in Musarabani or like a young person growing up, on a farm in Lotito, right? Or a young person in Borodale. It doesn't matter that, it's a young person that was raised by their grandmother on a farm, on a plot, or a young person that's raised as the child of a senior government official in this country. Every person is deserving of the same amount of dignity, but to live a life filled with potential, possibility, opportunity, where they can reach the heights of their capabilities. Now, I always argue, and this is why I wake up and do the work that I do, that if you're consistently living in an environment where your rights are being violated, where your right to education, your right to healthcare, your right to shelter, and some even very political rights, your right to freedom of expression, your right to freedom of torture, your right to a fair trial, your right to a legal representative of choice. Right? These are all fundamental rights. My right to vote for who I want. Those are all human rights. When you're living in an environment where those rights are consistently being taken away from you and violated, it means that we cannot live a life filled with opportunity and possibility. It means that we will live somewhat of a life, but it would not be a dignified life. So my argument is, and this is with all Zimbabweans, we have to live a dignified life now. And this is not something that can wait like another 20 years, another 30 years. We cannot tiptoe around power to say, hey, when we demand our rights, they get angry. You want to know who else is angry? It's poor people who have to go to Paririnyatwa and, they watch relatives die because there was no catheter. Something as simple as a catheter to help someone breathe. Yeah. Those people are angry, yeah? It's people that have lost loved ones in road accidents, right? Where you have to wait 5 hours, 6 hours for the nearest emergency rescue to arrive. Those people are angry too, yeah? It's people that are having their kids drop out of university because they cannot afford. They're civil servants that are living poor and impoverished lives. The people that buried their loved ones from cholera in 2008. That's a medieval disease. It happened 200 years ago in other parts of the world, and we're dealing with it now, right? Those people are angry too. So the elites are arrogant. They're arrogant. They will spend the money that they loot from us on their women in Dubai. They will buy sports cars and, flash all of that on social media. Absolutely. They are absolutely arrogant.
The first president said that she cannot.
Absolutely. They are absolutely arrogant. And we, as the people of this country, must never accept that. And the one thing that I will rest assure you, Costa, and this is my motivation and my determination, this is what I stand on. Of all the places in the world I could have been born, this is the place that I am born. Zimbabwe, the land of my ancestors. This is the place where I have been placed in the universe, where I was born. And I have a very deep connection with this land. I have a very deep connection with this place. I've been asked a lot of questions. Why don't you just leave? Leave the country.
When you have an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. I've traveled to so many places around the world. But I always come back because this is my country. This is my homeland. This is the country of my birth. It is the country of my ancestors. It is the land of my ancestors. And I have a very deep connection with this particular place that I call home, and that's Zimbabwe. So I would rather stay here and ruffle and scruffle and demand and challenge and be imprisoned from time to time. But as long as there is still breath in my body, there is still strength in my bones, then we will do this until the people have their day and the people have their victory and they have their dignity. And they live a life with decency. They live a life where Zimbabweans are restored to their pristine position. You know, in South Africa, they laugh at us. The Tswana people, they laugh at us, you know, because of how things have fallen. So we who are here, who are alive, must decide for ourselves that this is absolutely unacceptable. And agreed, sometimes we will fall, sometimes we will be harassed, sometimes we will be down. But as long as we have not lost faith in the Zimbabwean promise, in the belief that things can get better, not just for Shigananda and, you know, their wives and their small houses and their, you know, but for everyone, right? As long as we've not lost that radical, insistent belief that things can get better, and we're still willing to work for it, to fight for it, then I think there is hope for our country and for our people.
Wonderful. Yeah. Where do we see Namatei in the next 5-10 years?
I'll pass on that one.